be on the list, though, as something that could be done in 60 days or less. Do it at intake. And then just send us all of them. So we'll work that out, though. And then housing, whatever you can do to relieve pressure on the financial side that can be quick, we ought to do. And then these people need a place to live. So however we can work that out quickly should be in the very first thing that we do. But like I said, it shouldn't take 6 months to do it. And it really doesn't. You can do things in less time. Some of these are going to take a lot of time.
Exactly.
And some of them, people might be talking about them 2 and 3 years from now.
Yeah. I like that. And maybe this is something, I know this is going to go into a final report for the commission, but maybe that's how it's sequenced, is what are the low-hanging fruit versus what are the things that are going to take more time. Some are going to take 6 months, some are going to take a couple of years, some are going to take funding, and who knows how long that could take.
Right.
So,
but those other legal barriers, there was that mayor that talked about checking all of the other things in other cities, the mayor from Mountain Brook, that ought to be able to be done fairly quickly. If we can't develop a new computer system right away, let's figure out another way to get it done, because that would help these people stay on their feet and not end up failing real quickly.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree with Nina. That was the only comment I was going to make was it sounds like that's a really good sequence for maybe how the report could be organized, as far as these are things we feel like we can accomplish in this timeline, like you said, 6 months to a year. And these are things that will need a more robust system to.
No, I didn't say 6 months to a year. I said 60 to 90 days.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
Well, and there's also certain things that are going to require a working group and an action plan. There's certain things that are like, no, this is what you have to do to get this thing accomplished. We don't need a whole working group to talk about it for another 6 months.
Hey, I'm just reminding everybody, when you're talking, please put your mics down so we can hear. Also helps with that 30 to 90 days because we know what to do, put it into action.
Thank you.
The only other thing that relates to that statewide infrastructure, and that's later on in the recommendations, is when we talk about local reentry councils, because we see that as an opportunity as well to feed into this larger statewide reentry task force. I'm trying to think. It's on page.
Top of the 3rd page.
Thank you. Oh yeah, A on the top of the 3rd page. And we've seen this in other states as well, where they have local, whether it's regional or county-based reentry councils that bring together local providers, local agencies, state agencies in that locality to help provide that like one-stop like resource center. They provide the referrals. They have peer navigators, housing navigators, employment navigators, et cetera. They address the basic needs. But it's really an opportunity also to consolidate resources and a better way to share information with individuals that are coming out on release. And so we were thinking that those local reentry councils would kind of feed up to this statewide task force. Obviously, you're going to have to start small, think about piloting it maybe in 1 or 2 jurisdictions before rolling it out. A lot of examples here as well from North Carolina, which I know Rebecca's going to go visit next month, Kentucky. There's other states that have done this, and it's really a great opportunity to centralize some of those services and informational resources. So that's the only other thing that kind of relates to that statewide structure.
So, in hearing Commissioner Buckner, I agree completely. One of the things, talking about the unified management system, up until we can get some of these things going, I can see where some of these local councils could be instrumental, like especially with city municipal cases and things of that nature, when we're trying to make sure that we're not missing any outstanding warrants, missing any outstanding fines. What can we do to resolve them? Connecting with the local DHR services, the local public health, the local community college that's there throughout the state. And as Nina said, that feed goes up and down. In other words, the local can tell the task force what they need, but also the task force, as being more of an umbrella, can also report down. This is what we're seeing. This is what needs to happen. And it would also allow for some data collection and data collaboration on things that, like municipal courts, we really don't have a handle on as of yet. We're really not getting that data feed. So I'd be really interested to know what everybody thinks about those local.
Yeah, I know that there are a number of kind of smaller kind of alliances or coalitions that are doing some similar type work across kind of various areas of reentry, connecting folks with health, housing, resources, things of that nature. And so I think that this would be a good way to kind of lean into some of those previously existing structures and begin to invest in those and then upscale throughout the state from that.
And bring them together. Because a lot of times what we found is there'll be some amazing programs out there and people just don't know they exist. And you can be promoting it and promoting it and promoting it, and it still sometimes is not getting to the correct place. The most information I ever got was from a public health department. And I thought it was a really great experience. So just having those local task force, I think, would be imperative throughout the state.
Any other thoughts, feedback just on the statewide structure? Okay. So the next big bucket, recommendation 2 through 6, kind of focus on economic mobility, workforce development, addressing potential legal barriers to employment and licensure. Obviously, I know there's current legislation that's moving through to address some of that. Doing more to expand the number of employers that are hiring returning workers through educational efforts, engagement efforts, creating a more formal opportunity for workforce, for employers and other workforce agencies to collaborate and meet on a regular basis. That can help kind of get the message out, cultivate new relationships, promote best practices for hiring individuals with a record, developing resources for employers around hiring individuals with a criminal record in terms of potential incentives, mitigating risk, some of the legal barriers that they may not be aware of or may think are out there but are really not, so kind of myth-busting in a way. And then developing or convening employer partners to identify the benefits of being a reentry employer and what are the needs that they need to be able to be more successful with those individuals. That's one kind of area. Another is around expanding access to transportation. Obviously, we know transportation is a huge barrier to get people to their place of employment, particularly in rural areas around the state. So thinking about a way to establish and fund an initiative that helps transport individuals to the sites of major employers and having kind of employers play a role in that and incentivizing them to hire these individuals and provide them with transportation assistance. Having more statewide strategy group of around economic mobility, not just an employer-focused one, but this is bringing together agencies from workforce, community colleges, labor, obviously DOC and PNP, as well as providers that are providing workforce development training on the ground to have more of a coordinated strategy on an ongoing basis. And then the last piece is around expanding job support services to individuals and providing individuals with release with information and strategies kind of on day one. So thinking about providing information to individuals directly, expanding awareness, helping to develop a job search platform for individuals that are coming out of facilities specifically focused on this population. I didn't read them all in detail, but hopefully folks had a chance to review.
Nina, some of the things too that you were going through, if we had that task force, I think having a bunch of representatives from the private sector, whether you have some of our big industrial leaders or big companies, would be very helpful. Especially David and I were kind of talking offline about 4A. Where would that funding come from? What would it look like? Having some of those private sector leaders and job creators here kind of at the table, I think could help with that. That's just my 2 cents I wanted to throw out there.
That's great. Yeah.
I just think in whatever we do in regard to that, I think that's a great idea, but I think with the world that we live in now, we need to be very careful and not stigmatize these people. Because sometimes where you try to put something to take care of people that are serving their time or whatever, or taking care of them, then you have people that don't want to live next to it, or did you hear they're hiring such and such over here, so let's not go there anymore. So I think we need to be very, very careful. It's like walking on eggshells and trying to figure out a way to help them when you're trying to help, but you're ending up creating a lot of harm for them too. So.
That's a great point.
We've had a range of reactions from employers as far as the promotion aspect of our second chance job fairs. So it ranges from we have one upcoming next month with District Attorney Danny Carr. We partnered with him in Birmingham, and it's one of the biggest ones we have in the state. And the media comes out, and the employers are more or less receptive of being involved in media promotion, and they interview people that come out and that are looking for a job, and it's very open. And we had one last week in out of the Mobile.
John, not interrupting you. I'm sorry, I was John. A reminder, press your green button just to make sure that we're capturing the audio on this. It's really important. Sorry, Jonathan, to interrupt.
No problem. So our Mobile Career Center, which is at Bishop State, so thank you very much for the space, partnered with U.S. Probation for their third annual Second Chance Job Fair. And that was an instance where employers were a lot more apprehensive about any media attention, it being promoted that they were hiring felons. And that's a felon-only job fair, no misdemeanors allowed. So it was, reaching out to that specific group. So it's on an individual basis, you talk to employers, and they're really enthusiastic. They give wonderful, positive feedback about the results they get from the people that they hire. A lot of the individuals have come through our program that we have with our career centers that are working with the day report centers. So they've had some job training, or they've had the ability to go through the application process and helping to get their documentation in order. So it's really more, I think, amongst the companies, she's like showing them that they're stakeholders, that this is a benefit to have this population come in and work for you. And it's really a necessity when it comes to some of the numbers that a lot of our companies need when they're looking for people to hire. There are a lot of companies that are really in a deficit for good employees, and this is a population base that helps with that. So it's just kind of helping them to realize that it's okay to say that out loud, that, we hire people on second chance. It's kind of what we've been working on from our perspective at Workforce.
Yeah. Any other thoughts too on some of the other topics?
I think to your point too, Commissioner, one of the things that there's going to be some of these. That one in particular was the one that came out in my mind, the transportation one, funding and initiative. I mean, that's a long term. That's identify the funding. Where is this going to work? Who can be at the table? So a lot of these are going to have a kind of drawn out action plan for how we might get there and what is the capacity and resources needed. And then there's going to be others in these buckets that are, okay, well, we can think about what are the legal barriers. We can do this kind of assessment and survey. We can identify and pinpoint. We can develop resources for employers to better understand the benefit and necessity of employing these individuals. We can develop resources for individuals coming out. But some of these other things are going to be more of a long-term process.
And really, some of the resources are the same resources we've been searching for years on employment of the poor. Because they don't have transportation, and I don't really see why they can't some of them just be rolled in together. That way you really wouldn't be pointing out we're doing this for people that have been incarcerated versus the other. It's an age-old problem in Alabama. Transportation may be the biggest problem. Child care is a little bit, especially in rural areas, but transportation's a huge problem in getting folks to work. And Dave and I have had many, many conversations about how best to get there with this. and Ed Castile too. And we tried something one time, but it was pretty expensive to try to do it. We got them back and forth for a while, but then we ran out of money to do it. Yeah. So it's a difficult. But like I say, some of what's in here is things that we all need to do for the state to get the poor people to work too. So.
But that's a good point too, to think about where are there recommendations, obviously, that touch the reentry population, but touch a broader population in Alabama, and how do you align and roll that up? I come from the juvenile space, and we always talk about this because the number of young people in the juvenile justice system is small, but they're part of a larger group of young people that are disconnected, that have a lot of these different challenges that are similar. And I'm assuming that's the same here, where these are individuals that have similar challenges as other, groups. And so how do you make sure you're not competing for resources, because you're talking really about the same population often.
Right, and you don't need necessarily two groups going on working on it, because people go to so many meetings anyway.
Right.
Some of them can roll into the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, and to that extent, you're exactly right. They have overlapping needs. Having them all together, like serving the public, it would be interesting to look at what would be the benefits or the disadvantages to make sure it's open to the public. Like when we do the day reporting center, that like the ALEX and the job resource fairs with the community college systems, we do open it to everyone. But of course, I don't know what ramifications that might play into if you have someone that's not justice involved going to a building primarily for the service of the justice involved. But I agree with making it to where it's an inclusion. To where we're not excluding any one citizen that may be at need that falls within those parameters. And I think some of those local task forces might be able to connect, all the different committees. Like you said, you're on 82. There's all these different committees working for the good of the citizens throughout the state, to be able to provide those services to all who are at need and not just one caveat. I think could be a huge benefit. And then, like Nina was talking about the juvenile system, well, they graduate sometimes, and they graduate to us or to DOC. So to also be able to have a continuum of sorts of monitoring, what's going on with this person, and did they graduate to us, or did they go out into the world and be better and productive? I think that'd be a benefit, and that comes into play, I think, with the data collection piece that comes in later on in this report.
And I think that also goes to the point of not just ensuring that we're not being duplicative in efforts and expense of resources, but also to the stigmatization point that you all raised earlier, that if we are being inclusive, because there is a significant overlap in many of these populations, that goes a long way towards removing some of that stigma that goes along with whether it's job fair program or transportation that is afforded to one particular group but not another.
Any other thoughts on the workforce employment? I know from Ingram or the community colleges.
I have a quick question on the workforce side. Does the agency already have a statewide goal or target for employment or new job creation that this population is included in or can be woven into?
We have I won't say a concrete policy, but we have a strong initiative that we're working with all our career centers that they're prepared to work with people that are justice involved. So that's a category that they're aware of, and they're able to work with that person, the individual, and the employers to go through barriers to locate the funding that's in place to be able to hire some of these folks, where it alleviates some of that liability on the employer side. So all of those things are there. I think developing a statewide plan is kind of what we're hoping to kind of get out of this, because again, we don't want to have to duplicate services. I know a lot of that's happening now because things slip through at DOCs, things slip through at paroles, things slip through at workforce. So that duplication is it exists out of necessity, because everybody's not checking every box at every stage as they go through. So hopefully we can kind of get a clearer picture of where folks are, trying to find out with some common identifiers to be able to keep our hands on everybody. That's, a big mystery in data. We can't nail anybody down data-wise on where they are in the system. So those are just challenges, so that's just ongoing challenges, and we just keep fighting those same challenges.
One last point, and sorry to monopolize time. I think to kind of circle back, because it ties in, really leaning into those kind of local potential pilot councils will really help with that, because those groups interface and interact with so many of the different agencies that are here. One thing that I've been pleased with is, the amount of kind of conversation and communication about, hey, this is what our agency is doing already. These are ways that we can partner, but there's still naturally going to be blind spots there that a lot of these folks that are on the ground are already feeling and experiencing, and kind of can help uplift if there is a direct channel to those various agencies handling that.
I just want to chime in real quick about the duplicate efforts. I don't think that's a bad thing, actually, for our population, because it's so at risk, and we ought to build that into it, because sometimes we get into this model of other places to where, just like schools, you see tonight, today, where they try to get you in for it's 1 year crash course on the master's degree and all the other stuff. With our population, I think the more we can do, and if we're duplicating everybody else's efforts, I think they actually need it, really, to make sure. So it's not only a fail-safe, but it's also, I think, necessary for the population we have, because we have to redouble our efforts with them. So that's just 2 cents.
I really like the fact that Commissioner Buckner mentioned child care. Like, you're on fire today. I love it.
I've been on fire for about 4 weeks now. I wish it would simmer a little bit, really.
But child care is one thing that definitely touches everything we do. If you do not have child care, you can't work, you can't go to school. It's very difficult to be productive if you don't have that child care piece. So I just wanted to mention that as something that's worthy of attention.
Yeah.
I just want to add something else. It's near the end about the pre-release screening and assessment. If there's that's a really good opportunity, because that's right before they're leaving. If there was like a little checklist or something that you want the person doing the assessment to go over with them again at that point, that's a really good time to put it to them and give them a pamphlet. And that pamphlet might include certain resources that we know are already there, for them, or a number to call. When you want to know a lot of things in the state, you call that, I think it's 211. I love it. People call it, it's wonderful. People leaving prison, I don't know if they know to call that number or not, but they've got all kinds of information to give you when you call that number. And that's something we developed in the state years and years ago, and it's available to everybody. I get what you're saying about the duplicative, but I'm telling you, when it comes down to money, people are not going to give money if they think it's duplication of stuff. It's really hard. Money's tight right now, and it's going to get worse. And so, I still maintain, if you can roll it into the general population, why do you want to separate them anyway? I personally took it on about a few weeks ago to help somebody get a job that had been in prison. And it was at that point that I learned that certain employers will hire you. Some of them will hire you unless you have certain things on your criminal history. So, and it's kind of a unspoken thing. So you just call them and ask them. I was calling and asking them and talking to them, to help the guy get hired. And a lot of folks that do concrete work, labor-type work, which is a lot needed out there, they don't care that much about that. When you get into a little more professional higher-end things, some of even your manufacturers, they care what's on that criminal history more than others do. So it's not necessarily a one-stop-fits-all kind of thing. It depends on what's happened and what they've done. So they kind of almost need somebody to hold their hand, and that's the main thing. If there could be some organization or something out there that could take these people on, sort of like to mentor them along the way, because you have to do the same thing with underprivileged people too. They don't have the know-how to connect out there. They don't have that network. And if these task force that are going to be done in the counties could kind of serve to mentor some, not where somebody has to come before the whole task force, but a number or somebody on call to call and ask them what to do. I got a lady a job one time and told her, now, if you're out, make sure you call them. Well, she called them, but she called them after she got out of the hospital. So she lost her job. I'm sorry, I didn't tell her. Make sure you call them before you're not there. But these people that we're working with, and a lot of these people coming out of prison, they just don't know some of the things. Just like they don't know they can get their drug test when they get off work. They don't have to say, I'm leaving my job. I've talked to an employer recently where somebody got fired because he left to go get a drug test because he didn't want to get in trouble with his probation officer. I mean, you know, they need somebody they can connect with to help guide them too.
Yeah, I will say the other thing with the duplication of resources is having an understanding of this is where to go for this, or like this is like a clear delineation, clear roles and responsibilities. Oftentimes, if you think, oh, well, they've got it, they're doing that, then you're not going to, you know, too many people thinking they're doing the same thing. And then oftentimes that means no one's really taking ownership of it. So making sure with any of the recommendations that there's clear ownership and clear roles for agencies and providers and, you know, and so forth, to know, like, this is where to go for this, or this is who has ownership over this, because otherwise, oftentimes, then that's where things fall through the crack, too. Yeah.
I'm just looking at this as thinking about it like a judge. You know, so many times when I've said this before, judges see people come back through their courtroom, and no two are alike. They deal with so many different problems and combination of occurring conditions and problems, and I'm of course heartened to see all of this. This is encouraging, and my focus has completely been on 7A, because that was my question, was how, and Commissioner was just talking about, others have talked about it, is key, because when you ask, okay, why is this person back in front of me again? We have identified some problems there. Well, they just didn't do it. They just didn't do it. Like a parent in a dependency case in juvenile court, you knew that you had to do these things, you just didn't do it. But and I won't repeat things that have been said that are so important, but I'm just curious, and I know that we'll start with pilots, but establish local reentry councils, what will that look like? And there's a template you mentioned perhaps from North Carolina maybe, but who establish, because as we all know, there's a big difference between Connecticut County and Jefferson County. And you got huge differences across the state of Alabama, so establish, and that may be something that needs to be developed as to how it be established. I'm just curious about that because, again, there's just such disparity, lack of uniformity between county to county to county, depending on where you are.
So I think, as you said, I think that's kind of the next phase, is to flesh that out, what it could look like. And I think the way that other states have it is different depending on their resources and the state. So in North Carolina, it's state funded. They didn't start with it in every county. They've just recently rolled it out and expanded it. But it's state funding that goes to local reentry councils. They have a hired position within the local reentry council to staff it and run it, to bring people to the table. There's statewide kind of guidelines. It's not necessarily prescriptive, like every council looks exactly the same. It has to be flexible depending on that community, but it's more of a statewide to local kind of infrastructure and funding. I think in some states the local council operates from a nonprofit, in others it's more of out of a county commission. So there's a lot of different approaches depending on the infrastructure that already exists, the funding sources, et cetera. But that's kind of the next phase, is to flesh out what this could look like, what's feasible. I think here you'd probably think of it more of like a regional, not every county has a reentry council. So that's the next level, is bringing folks together to flesh that out and what's really doable. But learning more from those state examples as well.
I was just gonna say, we already have regional workforce councils. So if we're gonna do councils, let's make them the same
that's
region.
exactly it. Like what is already existing, right? We have the DRCs in certain regions. We have these there's probably other councils that exist. Like, how do we make sure there's alignment, create like a centralized point? You don't want to recreate the wheel.
And I was gonna say too, we have had family resource centers in this state for 20+ years, and many of them are wonderful at helping people. Even know some that have taught the local police chief, letting them out of jail, and they'd work with them, get them a job, help them pay their fines so they could keep a job and be more productive. That's what I'm talking about, kind of holding their hands. They're mentoring too. I mean, that's what it is, but it's holding their hands too to help get them where they need to get. So there's things in place.
Right.
We don't need to create everything new.
Yeah.
So.
That's what we've kicked around over at ADOC, and we kind of think that, let me see, I've got it right here, it would mirror the Alabama Department of Labor's workforce regions. I think would probably be a good fit in that way. There's already sort of an infrastructure that, you all have got one, and so we've got those regions identified. So that's kind of what our view is that's something we would want to look at.
And you'd want to start small. You'd want to start in 1 or 2 jurisdictions, build off of the existing infrastructure, see what works before you roll that out.
Based on, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Based on what the commissioner's saying, it seems like one of the first things that should be done is just to identify all the local resources that are in the counties already.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to create, or I guess initially talk about reestablishing or recreating the councils. So is there, I guess, a plan to look to see what resources each county already has and see what you can do to weave in what's needed with this committee into those?
Yeah. I mean, that could be the first step. So coming out of this meeting and creating that kind of implementation structures, the next step would be, what is an action plan to do for A? So if we want to have local reentry councils, the first step is probably what is already existing. Let's look and see what already exists in counties and how can we build off of that, and how you would want to establish. Then you'd want to probably establish like a purpose for these councils and a vision and who should be at the table. And so there would be like action steps, and that would probably be the first one is assessing what's already out there.
I've got a question. Is there any reason why the first things can't be doing away with the probation fee, putting the drug test, those 3 things, and not waiting to establish councils? Those things are quick, and there's probably a few other things that could be quick. Maybe that check on those other laws out there, other jurisdictions that they're in trouble with, to help them stay on their feet.
I do have a question about the transportation. Do we have any kind of state models outside of Alabama? Commissioner, you said we've tried, right?
We have, but now there are some places where they have some local things going on. Like, I know a family resource center that has been very successful for a number of years. Now, they transport the public. They have a little drop box, but I think they'll take you to doctor's appointments and other places, wherever. So I don't know if there's something that could be worked out. They do take some people to work. I don't know. It depends on how many people in that Talladega County area. It's the Safe Family Resource Center. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it or not. We also have a little bit of transportation going on in, it's out from Houston County. It's one of those little counties. And I think that one out of Talladega actually will run into Clay a little bit. And there may be a few more around the state that do that.
Okay, it just seems like this
but
is
not a statewide one. We've never been a state that did public transportation.
It just seems like this is a great opportunity to actually employ those that are on probation and parole in this population, right? I mean, you figure they're mechanics, you got your mechanics in-house. You can have dispatchers, you can have drivers, and they can basically police their own subpopulation, right, with this. If the funding's there to allow the job opportunities, then we could have, you don't need a CDL to drive a 12-passenger van. That's 12 more people that we can get to places of employment versus 0. So that's just my thoughts on that process.
Yeah, and we can share examples. I think there aren't like statewide examples. There's examples of places where large employers have done certain things, like providing transportation for this population, but statewide infrastructure for transportation is probably the number one challenge we hear when we're in every state, especially larger states.
And we do have multiple employers in some rural areas that offer transportation just to anybody that's willing to work there.
Yeah.
So and that's part of the advertising that goes out when we have a job fair. You know, we'll provide transportation, and that's really for any population, but it's hit and miss. You know, it's one company A is doing it here, and I'm always careful. I don't think I'm allowed to mention any company by name as a member of the Department of the Workforce. So I'm just saying company A may be in the business of making widgets, and company B is also making widgets, but A is offering transportation because of their geographic area, because they're farther away from the center of Jefferson County. You know, so those folks out that way, they just wouldn't be able to get there in any other circumstance. So they had to offer transportation. So in cases where it's done, if we don't go and pick them up, nobody's going to be here to make these widgets. So it's kind of, it occurs when it's an absolute necessity, not let's just do this nice thing and offer rides.
There has to be some incentive or reason that they're,
And I should reiterate, I do believe it should be for the whole population. It shouldn't just be for the subset of the population, because there's a lot of people that have not been incarcerated or in the system at all that need the same assistance. So I think this is something that could help the whole population in total in Alabama. So I just wanted to reiterate that I wasn't focused just solely on that subpopulation.
That's a good point, and but I will say this: all of the issues that exist for like underserved communities or poor impoverished communities, they exist for the justice involved community exponentially.
Exactly.
So because of that, these folks are going to be the most likely to need that service. So their group is a higher percentage that's actually going to need that transportation services, actually need the child care services, even more so because they're a subset of that larger impoverished community. So they're at the extreme edges of it, which is why it looks like we're focusing on a population, but it's not necessarily pulling away resources from that greater population as a whole. It's just focusing on the most kind of in desperate need of that population that would need that service.
Well, and they have additional barriers at the layered on top. So we already got into it a little bit with the local reentry councils, but the next section of recommendations is around reentry preparedness. So recommendations around trying to build awareness for individuals that are reentering and the larger reentry community about what are the available services, benefits, how do you enroll or apply for certain benefits, what's the eligibility criteria, making folks aware of crisis services, recovery housing, how to apply for SNAP, et cetera, pre-release, making sure that there is some sort of opportunity for cross-agency sharing of resources, maybe like an inventory of what's available that can be shared with everyone working with this population, supervision officers, reentry coordinators, obviously the individuals themselves. Also addressing any unresolved legal and financial barriers and obligations that impact reentry, and that may inhibit an individual's ability to obtain a driver's license, may lead to any arrests in terms of outstanding warrants or fines and fees. Having a more formalized process for reentry coordinators to identify and help facilitate the resolution of outstanding court warrants in municipal court prior to release, eliminating fees for probation supervision, increasing education to incarcerated individuals and all the folks working with them about the hardship licenses that we learned a little bit more about from Aaliyah, to allow folks to drive to school, to work, et cetera, even when they are under certain constraints. And then thinking about how to educate judges about the grace period, thinking about opportunities to eliminate additional fines and fees that may be barriers to individuals' reentry. And then something around child support as well is in the partnership between DOC and DHR around understanding child support obligations and amending child support orders. So that's under the preparedness category. And I know we already talked a little bit about some of those. But any other thoughts, feedback, additions?
The only thing I'd say quickly is we're working toward the resolve of the probation fees, but that does not resolve like community corrections, pretrial diversion, all of those other fees that exist as well in the supervised community of our justice-involved population. The other thing that I would say is standardizing all these different programs to make sure that individuals are not being taken for granted when they go into these programs. In other words, if employers are paying a stipend per individual that come to work for them, in other words, transparency. If you're going to take their check, it needs to be transparent. They need to have some financial literacy steps in place. A lot of our folks that are coming from corrections do not have the financial literacy to understand what happens when someone else is controlling their check and controlling their bank account. I would think that having standards for each of these programs that exist, I think those local councils could do that as well, and that falls under workforce development and preparedness.
I may be dumb, but who controls their check?
In some programs, they'll connect them to employment, and they'll connect them with housing, which is a beautiful thing, don't get me wrong. But the caveat to that is they control their bank account and they control the check. The check goes to that organization. So there's stipends, and they pull certain fees and not fines, but certain fees and things for connecting them to that employer and for connecting them to housing.
What program is that?
There's more than one.
For an example.
So
I don't know if we want to call them out by name.
Right.
Or maybe offline.
But there's more than one.
Okay.
That what they do is they'll take their check and they also set up their bank account. And sometimes the folks that we serve don't always have the financial literacy to understand exactly what's being taken out or what's happening with their check.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I never heard, I didn't know they did that. You didn't either.
No, I had not. It sounds like the.
I'm not sure how I feel about it.
It sounds
either,
like the
so
payday
send it to
loan
me.
of
I
Reentry.
wanna see it.
Is it? So that's.
I mean, that's the beauty of like family resource centers and things. They do classes on financial literacy and things like that. And, you know, we could probably get them to do some more. The lady that heads that up's wonderful. I'd be happy to share her contact information with y'all and talk to her about what they do. And they may be willing to add a program if they don't have a particular program there. So,
Well, and a lot of them come straight out off of EOS. And if they're homeless, don't get me wrong, if they're homeless, I mean, there's a facet of the population that needs it. My concern is the transparency and making sure that the individual knows what is happening with their pay when they go to work under these circumstances.
well, if they don't know enough to hold their money themselves, I doubt they're going to know enough to understand what that organization is saying to them. And I just need to shut up now, so.
Go ahead, Beverly. Oh, I was just gonna say, guys, I think we have about 5 minutes left, and I told my director not to worry. I would keep it under an hour, even as an absence. So if y'all want to, Beverly, go ahead, and then Nina will.
It's just a real quick statement. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, whenever you were going through this bucket, was sharing of resources. We spoke earlier today about, you know, a lot of the barriers to helping someone is connecting resources to the people who need it. And it's been mentioned here today that the Alabama 211 system is very good, and it is very good. My department had spearheaded an effort to try to gather together resources for veteran populations specifically, and the incarcerated populations as well. And it was very time consuming and onerous trying to maintain that. But the 211 system is maintained. And what we ended up doing is instead of trying to create our own lists of things, what we've been doing is encouraging our partners that we work with to register with 211. So it's a win-win whenever we all use a system like that. Because now if I need to find resources maybe that your people have been utilizing, I don't have to go and go, hey, what's the latest list? You know, I can just look it up in 211 and do that. And so that kind of a statewide list, there's value added there. And I just wanted to add that to the mix.
That's also true because an inventory can get stale very quick.
Very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to adhere to your hour, but now I know we have a whole section.
Yeah, no, and please take all the time you need.
No, I will. I'll adhere to your. It's other folks who might not. No, I won't. So the next section is around behavioral health and housing, which I'm not sure in 5 minutes we can talk about, but we can try. So in this section, there are recommendations around formalizing cross-system collaboration and information sharing between behavioral health, corrections, and providers, making sure that there's formal procedures, roles, responsibilities, ways to share information related to release date and the behavioral health needs of individuals so that that connection can be made more seamlessly to mental health and substance use treatment prior to an individual's release. Continuity of care by making Medicaid benefit reactivation more automated, kind of immediate upon release. Expanding MAT and MOUD treatment, both in corrections as well as continuing that in the community upon reentry. We have recommendations around exploring Medicaid demonstration projects in a couple of different areas around MOUD as well as around elderly care and for folks with disabilities. Recommendations around expanding the availability of safe and supportive housing for the reentry population, doing pre-release screening to better understand what an individual's risk around housing is before they leave a facility, and also to understand the broader scale of the state's needs around housing for this population so that you can better tailor resources and think about ways to expand what's really needed based on the population, doing more in-reach while an individual is in a facility, doing more targeted outreach to different types of housing providers and housing authorities to educate them about the reentry population, similar to what we talked about with employers, but having some sort of roundtable conversation at the regional level to talk about the barriers to housing for this population and ways to mitigate those barriers. Obviously, there has to be some creative partnership and funding discussion around how to do some of this work. And expanding the availability of recovery housing, particularly in more rural jurisdictions, and strengthening the quality assurance process around recovery housing. And we know some of that is already kind of in movement with the State Alliance, but trying to do that with every recovery housing that kind of comes on board. I went through that really, really quickly. There's other recommendations in there, but if folks have had a chance to go through them or read them ahead of time, any thoughts or additions, feedback? Concerns as well, other than funding. That's why I knew. And then the last category, just quickly, is around data. There, just so folks know, process-wise, obviously there's these recommendations from the working groups for the commission. We've also had conversations directly with PNP and with the Department of Corrections as well, and we're going to be developing and working with them on some recommendations for their particular agencies, and data is obviously one, but these are some data recommendations that are more cross-systems than just like at PNP and DOC around data entry or input and so forth, but this is more around establishing more clear statewide consistency in data definitions and what we mean by certain reentry outcome measures that we want to be able to collect and track across not just recidivism, but employment, behavioral health, education, housing, et cetera. And then convening a stakeholder data group. I know there was one in existence some years ago, but to support some of this ongoing data work. Data is not short-term, low-hanging fruit, probably part of this. And so thinking about some ongoing way to work on data definitions, data standardization, quality assurance around data collection, I think would be really useful.
Yeah, and I know that you'll had a good conversation with AOC, and we have Bennett here from AOC representing, but I know that's going to be a big component of anything we do moving forward too. And you're right, it's not low-hanging fruit, it's not going to be immediate, but it is something that's critical to be successful in our mission here. So
yeah,
that'll be good.
I think it's critical too, because as you're looking at all these recommendations across these different domains, there's the critical piece of how do you measure if what you're doing is actually working, and what are the key questions that you want to be able to answer about reentry in Alabama. And it's not just recidivism, but it's how many people got a job, what are their wages, how many people are homeless, how many people, so there are some key questions that you want to be able to answer around outcomes, and thinking like kind of back mapping, how are we going to actually track that?
And the important part, and this is kind of from my previous life with federal probation, is typically data drives funding, and we've got to have good data. And so we need to know all this stuff so that when the legislature asks questions, Congress in the case when I was before, but that's the key point, and I think that should, when we're thinking about the data, that should help drive, the importance of it. So
that actually reminds me too about the local reentry councils and the role that they can play, is doing that kind of not just data collection on the back end, but on the front end, like doing like community needs assessment. What are the needs of this population and where are their gaps, and using that information to drive funding and decision making and resources and how they're allocated.
Yeah, and I think our next steps, we're gonna have a few more, maybe like one more meeting after this, but I think we're kind of wrapping things up. We appreciate these recommendations, and thank you all the working groups for helping put these out there and put them together. What to expect next? Nina, do you have any suggestions for how to pare it down? Should we just pull a few from each category that we, like Commissioner was saying, that are attainable? Maybe you have your 30 to 90 day window, your immediate things you can do, and then after that you have some of the long term, not so much low hanging fruit, but still that are very important to us.
Yeah, I think you could sequence it out. So having the low hanging fruit, these are things that can be done more immediately, and then I think within each category, like having like short term versus long term recommendations. And then I think the next step would be creating that kind of statewide infrastructure and thinking about the mechanism to create that, the representation, the alignment, kind of with what else is happening in the state, other commissions, task forces, et cetera, and developing more concrete action plans for how you would go about accomplishing that. But I think starting out with, in your report at least, these are the things that can happen more immediately. And then within workforce, within behavioral health, these are short-term versus these are going to be long-term, more resource-intensive ideas.
Sounds great. Anybody have anything else before we adjourn? Thank you all for being here on a Thursday, Tell Light Thursday, but we appreciate your time.
Y'all have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
So give feedback, because we're almost done with that course, and then we can share that with the whole group. Good to see you.